Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Happily Never After. I'm Kate.
I'm Jay. We're working on turning the page after spousal loss. Last week we were talking about the difference between solo parenting and single parenting. On the surface, it seems like exactly the same. But when you dive deeper, you realize there are a lot of differences in the terminology. But again, definitely listen to that episode. But today's episode, we're going to be talking about what to do with your spouse's things. You know, as a widow or a widower, one thing we go through is what do we do with all of the things that we've acquired over the years from the person we love? You know, where we going to put them? Today's conversation is going to really talk about what are some of the places, some of the things that you can do to address that aspect. Kate, let me ask you real quick. I know when you had situations dealing with Craig and his things, what did you do?
I'm so excited for this conversation, this topic in particular. Um, I'm a minimalist at heart. Like, less is more for me. I grew up in a household that was like all of the knickknacks and the tchotchkes and the things and the shelves. And, my chore was to dust all the things. So maybe I'm just a little bit of hashtag childhood trauma. I'm joke. I joke. But and cohabitating with Craig was a real head trip because God love him, but he had hoarder tendencies. We always joked that like when I first moved in, we lived in a little condo in a small town and he was like, "All right, well like make space for your stuff." And he was at work and he comes home and I have like every single kitchen cabinet pulled out onto the table and all the counter space and on the floor. And he was like, "Have mercy." And I'm going nuts. I'm like, "Why do we have three oil fryers? Two of them don't work. One of them doesn't even have a cord. Why do we have Girl Scout cookies from 1996? Like, why? Why do we have 17 spatulas? Why? We have one drawer for utensils. I don't understand. Why do we have six sets of dishes? Why? It's just you by yourself here. Why?" And so he called it the purge of aught 13. The purge, as we call it, pre-purge, post-purge. That's how we refer to our time. It's like BC and AD,
Yeah,
pre-purge and post-purge.
man,
But
but
when, we did that stuff and we got rid of a bunch of stuff, but he still had a lot of stuff. And then we moved from that tiny condo and we moved into a beautiful house, our forever home. And then after he died, I had to downsize and I had to downsize very quickly because the house was under the probate stuff. And so I won't go into all of the details this time, but I ended up losing the house. So basically, I got a letter of remand and they were like, "You've got 90 days, get out." How do you get rid of a 4,000 square foot house in 90 days?
right.
Like in December and January. So, I held three like months of weekend tag sales. I sold a bunch of stuff on like Facebook Marketplace and eBay and, you know, had people help me consign things and no estate house, like auction houses, would really take his
Right,
stuff because it wasn't like high value stuff. There was a lot of sentimental value, but there wasn't actual like high dollar value for
right.
his childhood dresser. But it was a lot of that. And then when I did move, I didn't have nearly enough space. So I ended up having to rent a storage unit. And I just threw everything that wouldn't fit in the condo I'm in now or that I didn't have immediate use for. I threw it all in the storage unit. I mean, God bless that storage unit, but that's where his comic collection went and his vintage vinyls and, the graphic t shirts that he loved that I saved and some handmade wooden furniture that he was heirloom, like a bed frame from 1902. Like all of that stuff's in the climate control storage unit because I just don't have space for it. I'm in like half the square footage. It's crazy.
You know what? I mean, I absolutely understand. I remember, first off, coming from Jersey down here. I mean, what was interesting, I contacted U-Haul to have them ship the things down here.
Like
And
one of
so I
those
had,
pod things?
yeah, I had two pods and
I always wondered
I
how
got
those
all
work.
this stuff. Well, they work like this, expensive as hell. All right, I'll tell you that. But needless to say, we got down to the location. It got down to the location, all good, But I get there, and I'm just like, okay, now I have to I have to figure out what I'm gonna do with this. I've got, I move into a two-bedroom apartment. So,
You
I'm
brought
like,
everything to Texas before downsizing?
I downsized in Jersey, but
Yep.
I still had so much stuff by the time I got to Texas. I ended up going to a storage, putting in a storage unit too. I, I, I went there, last week to just look at some
But you
things.
still have the
And
storage unit.
yes, I still have the storage unit because my daughters, they have things, like my daughter just came from school. Some of her stuff is in that storage unit. Now, let me tell you something. We cleaned out tons of stuff, you know, but there's still some stuff in there. Plus, I threw some stuff in there because, I was living in an apartment and things like that. But, you know, when it comes down to really making the choice as to what you're going to keep, what you're going to let go, you know, and this is me kind of bouncing around real quick, but looking at it from a widow or widower's point of view, the first thing I tell everybody, take your time.
Mm, so
Don't
much so.
don't don't sit up there and just because I mean, obviously you are under a different time strain.
Yeah.
That's
There was a
different.
there was a level of urgency and like I was under
Right.
duress. And so do I think that I made some rash decisions that I may regret later on down the road? Probably. There's probably some stuff of his that I, you know, wouldn't have wanted to get rid of. But I also have like my daughter was only 19 months old when he passed away. She's about to be 5 in a month. And I think about it now and I'm like, she doesn't really have that memory of him, that relationship with him. So I almost have an obligation, or I feel an obligation to hold on to more of his stuff. So as she grows, she can get to know him through his stuff, through his records, through his books, through his t-shirts, through his like I have all of his old work files. I have, some like he used to print out comic strips from the internet back in the 90s, like some chat threads between him and some old friends. Like I have all of that stuff, like jokes, emails he used to send, like all of that stuff is boxes upon boxes of shit that I don't necessarily need or even want, but I feel guilt and I am hard pressed to purge any more than I already have. Now, mind you, storage units are expensive. And I paid for the climate control one very specifically because New England weather sucks, but also like his books, his vinyls, his antique furniture. I couldn't risk that being out to the
That
elements.
stuff you get,
So I
yeah,
pay extra for the climate
exactly.
controlled one because if I'm going to preserve his stuff, then I have to actually preserve his stuff.
Right. Right.
But so it's expensive. Like it's not a huge storage unit, but it's expensive. And to now have to pay that for the next 14 years until she's an adult or old enough to actually appreciate and understand what I've left for her, like that long-term investment is starting to weigh heavy on my mind. And I don't know if she's going to want any of it or all of it, if she's going to
Right.
be mad at me for getting rid of the things I did get rid of, if she's going to be indifferent and indignant because like, well, mom, you're wasting money. Why'd you keep all this garbage? Like, I don't know. It might mean nothing to her, but Craig always used to say, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it
They need
and not.
it and not have it. Yep. And you know, it, see, that's a double-edged sword when when your spouse has passed on. Because the truth of the matter is, you feel like you need all of it, but the reality is that You
I'm
just
pretty sure
don't
I
want to
don't need
get
his dresser with socks and underwear anymore,
right,
but that is
right,
still in the storage unit, and that is the one thing. I tried to sell we had a high top kitchen table, and I downsized because it was just taking up too much space in the condo, and I downsized to a smaller bistro-sized kitchen table for me and the kids, and I went to sell that on the Facebook Marketplace, and it got right up to the point where, like, the people showed up with the truck, and I, like, burst into tears, and I was paralyzed, and thank God the woman was so incredibly kind where, she asked what was going on, and I told her a little bit of my story, and then she starts to cry, and she's like, "Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Nope, we'll leave. Don't even worry about it," and I, like, sent her money back, and then she sent me back half as, like, with a note on Venmo, like, buy you and your baby some ice cream tonight, take care of you. Like, she was so incredibly sweet. But it's
right.
okay to not sell the stuff. And so now that table's in the storage unit because it's too
Yeah.
big for the condo, but I don't have the heart to get rid of it. So the table, I make sense. The table's the heart of the home, right? It's where we sat, day before he
Dinner,
died.
that
We had one of our
yeah,
last meals sitting at that table as a family. So it makes sense to me that that's hard to get rid of. But his dresser from our bedroom that still has socks and underwear in it, completely undisturbed, it moved from the house straight to the storage unit. And it is sitting there 3 years later, socks and underwear still in it. Ain't nobody gonna want his socks and underwear. And that dresser, I don't really want. Like, I have no emotional attachment to the dresser itself, but I just can't disturb it. I can't. It's the
right.
one
It was
thing
his. That's it.
that I can't. I had no problem throwing out his toothbrush. I had no problem throwing out his like the night he died. I'm in the bathroom, like purging the medicine cabinet and like his nightside table and like fuck this garbage. Why do you have all these receipts? This is bullshit. Throwing out his razor, all this other stuff. And you'd think that that stuff that like has his physical DNA on it would have been
Right.
hard. No, no problem. But the dresser with the socks and underwear in it, like, can't get rid of it. It's totally okay. So for people listening, like, just know that there's no rhyme or reason to what feels okay and what doesn't feel okay to keep. And people are going to try to talk you out of keeping stuff. Like, oh, you don't need that. Like, the number of times I've still hear that when people find out that dresser is in the storage unit. Like, oh, you don't need that. You could probably let that go. Or, oh, you should donate the socks to the homeless shelter. Like, my heart goes out to people in the homeless shelter and I so want to help them, but I can't. And I've
Yeah.
come to accept that that's okay.
Well, you know what, Kate? Let me tell you something. There is the old method of figuring these things out. It, you know, and I actually used it. I it was hard, but it revealed a lot of things. Like I had literally created the 3 pile system where I had the
Oh, the keep, donate, and
keep,
trash.
discard, and donate. You know, and now my let me tell you something. I actually the donate I call the don't know pile.
Okay.
That that I don't know pile was high. Yeah. And I had to realize, look, man, don't know is you're just trying to avoid discarding.
Yeah,
So,
you're putting it off. It's
you
almost like
know,
procrastinating on that.
and I mean, and I had look, I had to have those real what I call come to Jesus conversation
Mm.
with myself. I whittled down a lot of stuff. I'm gonna tell you, when first off, like I said before, when you're going through something, don't if you have a time circumstance, that's different. But if you don't have certain time obligations, don't make it a priority. You know, when you
Take your
get
time
to
with
it,
it.
you'll deal with it. You know, don't let anybody else convince you of anything. And also, listen, you there will be a lot of people who will be coming by wanting to get the best of your favorite stuff that he had because
Hmm.
they've had their eye on it for Lord knows how long.
Oh,
It
yeah. That
always
was a
start
hard
with
pill
something
for
like,
some people to swallow.
"Oh yeah," like can I get that? No, you can't have that.
Oh,
You
what
know,
happened to his
well,
watch? I'm like, none of your
yeah,
business.
yep,
It's also
and
weird, like, inheriting stuff, because I moved in with him. He already had an established place when I moved in. And then, yeah, we moved into a house, but there was an age gap between us, and yeah, we acquired some stuff together, but there's some things that belonged to him that they're mine. And I had that weird epiphany. I'm like driving down the road the other day, had to dig out my daughter's birth certificate to do kindergarten registration, which is a whole other head game, by the way, mind fuck. But I'm in the safe. We have a fire safe, and like the small one is in the bottom of the closet. And I was going through it, and I'm like, I wouldn't have this if it weren't for him. I wouldn't have a safe. Like my parents had one, and it's very old school to have a safe to like keep your
Yeah.
documents and whatever in. Like most modern people don't do that. I'm grateful for it because if God forbid something ever happened, all the important paperwork is in there. Um, but at the same token, I'm like, man, like the the hand mixer that I have, like that was his mother's, and it's mine. It's mine. Like my favorite
Right.
blanket that I snug on the couch with, like that was his, and the coffee table, like that was his, and the safe and the computer, like the desktop computer, like that was his. And it's so wild to think about that. Just you inherit this stuff, like it just transfers ownership. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I had this like wild epiphany
No,
about that concept.
and it makes perfect sense because it's like these things were yours by proxy, but they really weren't yours. They were his. And
They were ours as a
now,
collective, and he's not here,
right,
so I guess
right.
they're
So
mine.
you're like,
But that still
right.
doesn't feel right. Like they're not mine, but they are
I
mine.
mean,
I don't know.
and now those become, here's what's interesting. Those become the items that you become okay with having other people have. Like you said, your mother's egg beater. You know, hey, you may want that back, type of thing. I remember like
Well,
when
his
I
mother has
was
passed away since, like she was passed away
oh
before we even met. But if she was around and she wanted it back, 100%, Louise could
yeah.
have her hand mixer back. Yeah, I
I
didn't
mean
even think about that.
I had that situation. I mean, like I said, I packed up a bunch of things. I ended up giving them to Kim's mother because, hey, that was her daughter. And there are certain things that are special. They're special to me only because they were hers. But the fact that her mother could really appreciate these particular things. Like there was one that had her baby wristband.
Hmm.
You know, not me and not the girls, Kim and her sisters. That's her mother's all day. You know what
Yeah,
I'm
that
saying?
makes sense.
And it's like, you know, and of course, hey, Kim had them because, you know,
Yeah, there's
she
sentimental
had them.
value for her.
What I suggest a lot of the times too is finding out who can use certain things. If you can't, like you said, maybe you're downsizing. Find out who can use that.
Well, like your
Who
girls, when
can
they went off to college or are going off to college, they're going to need some household stuff or their first house or first apartment furniture. So if there's stuff in the storage unit that you can then allocate outward, that it's going to a good purpose, right? But for the people
right.
who don't have that, how do you feel okay with letting go of your spouse's stuff and it's just out floating around in the ether? Not It's almost like when you have to rehome a pet or something, you want to make sure it ends up in a good home and that the
Good
person is going
home.
to love it and take care of it. And like at least it went to a loving home. How do I know that the dining room table is going to a good home and they're not going to like deface it
See,
or whatever? And you can't know that. There's no guarantee for that.
that's the point.
But it's
You
almost like
can't.
that's what the feeling is.
But you know what? I tell you something. There is a point where if you've decided it's okay to let it go, you now have to let it go.
Well, like I
So,
said with the kitchen table, though, I had decided it was okay to let it go, and I was great. I was fine up until the woman stepped foot in my house to take the
right.
table. And then I was like, oh no, I am not okay. Reserve the right to change your mind. There is
Right.
no pressure, there's no shame, there's no problem. And anybody who's any kind of human being will totally understand and let you off the hook. So reserve the right to change your mind.
And that's a big one because when you're in the look, you're in the middle of attempting to be strong, while at the same time you're at your most vulnerable.
It makes you
So
feral. Grief makes
it,
you feral, and you're expected to make these sound decisions about potentially important things, like documents. Like, when do you get rid of their old W-2s or tax
right,
documents or bank statements? Or, the rule of thumb with that is 7 years. You're supposed to keep old financial records for 7 years. After that, you're supposed to shred it. And a lot of places will do like free shred events at your town
right,
halls. Or I know like the UPS store and FedEx, they have a bin that they'll do it by the pound where it's like 10 cents a pound. Where I brought a lot of Craig's old stuff to have shredded. But like those documents, you go, what do I need? What do I don't need? Purge your paperwork and get it down to just anything that has numbers on it, keep for 7 years.
yeah. I mean, look, if it's a contract or if it's something with numbers, hold on to it. You know, I
Because again, I'd
mean,
rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it because you never know who's going to come back
exactly,
around and say something.
and ask for it. And it's a reality. My whole thing is we just figure out what we need to do from there. When you go back and you start thinking about it, it does make you feel like there's levels of guilt in it, no matter
Totally.
what. Because no matter if it's in a good place or not, it's not where it used to be. It's not getting the use. But then also it's like the person that was using it is no longer. So it's not getting used. Maybe certain things you share, that you care about. But like you talked about, Craig's comic books, you weren't a comic fan.
I
So
had to sell those though, and part of like he was a huge comic collector, big, big, big comic collector. So he sold half the collection, and that's how we paid for our wedding. And then I was left with the other half of the collection, and I had to sell it. And the second half took me longer to sell because there was more rare comics in it. So finding buyers who would actually give me, I was literally just gonna like whatever. And I had a friend, thankfully, who knew about comics, and he started going through stuff, and he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I was like, well,
right,
I'm on a time crunch. Like, I don't have time for this stuff to sit around. So he took it back to his place. Now he lived in New Hampshire. So he literally loaded up his trailer and took like he brought his truck and his trailer down and he loaded up his trailer and brought all the comics and he's like, I'll sell them for you. And I don't even want anything for it. And so he took the time and the effort and invested and got me top dollar for everything. But that took like 9 months to sell that collection. So there was some stuff like you
wow,
have to get creative about, like, I was on a time crunch, so I couldn't keep the stuff, but like it wasn't a short thing to sell. So for people who are in the financial thing, the thing I would say is like I looked at pawning things, I looked at
right,
like auction houses and stuff like that. And you have to be really careful with that stuff because you could end up getting upside down on it. Like financially, I got into a tough spot and I almost pawned my wedding ring. And I'm so thankful that I didn't. Um, I still wear my ring from time to time. I had it resized for my right hand. Um, and I added a small black diamond band to it. And people are like, why are you spending money on that? I'm like, because it made me feel good at the time. And at the time, I had a little bit of extra to do that. But I still wear my ring from time to time, and I still have his ring. I wear it on a necklace from time to time, like just on a chain. Um, and I think that that's important. Do you have her ring or your ring?
you know what? Actually, I'll never forget the day I decided to take it off. I took it off, hers was already in a container,
Mm,
and I took mine off because for me, the whole thing was about starting again,
Mm.
you know. And then after a while, I actually did. I personally, I pawned them.
You
You
pawned
know,
both of them?
yeah. I'm like, I used the money, and I wasn't giving them to anyone else. And
Mm.
on top of that, my whole thing was like, you know what? As much as I love Kim, the relationship's over.
That's it.
You know,
Doesn't mean you don't love
and
her because you don't keep the ring. Like,
right, that's not the case at all. It was just, you know what? It was a piece of jewelry that ended up becoming a reminder that I didn't want.
mm, it became more
You know,
painful for you.
it really did. And my thought process was, I know that first off, I know my kids are not going to want these things.
Your daughters didn't want
I
her
know
wedding ring?
that. You know what? Nope. Um, one, I don't think either one some I'm getting married shit, period type of thing. You know, um, and or if they do, they on some we ain't having kids, whatever.
Yep.
So we don't need that. You know what I'm saying? So and plus, I got that ring from my mom, and
Gotcha.
and she didn't want it back. So
Gotcha.
why? My whole thing is do what you if it no matter what the circumstance is when you're when you're downsizing your situation or when you're trying to figure out where things need to go, you always got to look at it. What is your economic play?
I think that
Where
that has to be the driving factor. If you cannot have that be your driving factor, like if it's a perk that you make a little extra money from the thing and it's not like if you're not selling something that you're super emotionally tied to, like we had an air hockey table. I had no emotional tie to that. That was easy for me to sell. And I was like, here's the perk, I'm making money. But, thinking about pawning the rings, that was a hard thing. And I ultimately decided against it because I was so afraid I would never see them again. That was, and the table, like the kitchen table, like that was an easy thing when I had that flip of that switch.
anytime you can be, I'm okay with it, and then be like no, or you can be like no, and then finally be okay with it. You can't. Don't worry about that particular feeling because however it goes, however it guides you, don't sit up and put yourself in a circumstance where you feel like, well, I didn't feel like letting this go, but then at the last minute, I kind of felt it was all right, and don't feel guilty about that. Or like you said, I'm okay with letting something go until I have to
Yep.
actually let something go.
Reserve the right
Be
to
okay
change your
with
mind.
that. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I think the other thing that's really interesting is like, I'm 3 years out. And I recently this year finally made the commitment. I'm an organization freak. I said I'm minimalist at heart at the beginning of this, but I also actually have a clinical diagnosis of OCD. I hate when people are like, oh my God, I'm so OCD. But, I'll get off that soapbox for now. Um, but, my OCD popped off the beginning of this year and I went on like an organization tangent. And I went through my pantry and I like switched everything to clear containers with labels because stimulation is a thing where I like can't process things if it's too confusing. So putting things in all matching containers with labels streamlined that process for me and took the anxiety out of cooking and grocery shopping and putting stuff away. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, it looks so pretty." I'm like, has nothing to do with beauty, has everything to do with being neurospicy, but I appreciate that there's a benefit to it. I digress. I've been using forever Craig's old school Tupperware containers for like flour, sugar, all of those things. And they're like, you know which ones I'm talking about, the like ugly ass orange round cylinders.
Yes.
They're that like greenish yellow orange set with like 7 different containers, the spaghetti one and then the clear one and then the big one. He ugly ass set. I've hated them forever. And I very easily could have gone out and bought new containers when I had to buy storage stuff when I first moved into this condo 3 years ago. But I didn't Because I was like, oh, these are good enough. Don't waste my money on that. They're his soft spot. Nope. When OCD popped off the beginning of this year, and I was like, that's it, I'm changing everything. I finally switched out those containers. I reached out to his other older children and I was like, before I just drop these off at the Goodwill, does anybody want them? And I
Yeah.
was full well
Right.
expecting both of them to say no. And I was totally okay and prepared to just drive my ass to the Goodwill later that day and drop them off. I was okay with that. So, what my point with all of this is, it's okay for that audit to come up 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later. Like, you can reevaluate and either repurpose or downsize or swap out, put something in storage and bring something else out. 3 years later, some of his bookshelves that have been in storage for the last 3 years, we just moved my son into the basement, rite of passage now that he's a teenager, right? But I was able to like pull those bookshelves out of the storage unit and put them to use. And I was like, wow, I haven't seen these in 3 years. This is weird. But I had them. And it was great that I had them because I didn't have to incur costs to buy furniture. It felt good to repurpose these things and use them again. It cleaned up some space in the storage unit. And then, other things are going, like the Tupperware containers. Those are going to go to my stepdaughter. She's going to take them. She actually just recently got married and they're building their first home together. And so I'm like, great, you want your dad's food storage containers? And she took the hutch we had off our hands when I moved into the condo and I couldn't have it, which made me feel good that, I didn't sell it to just some rando who was going to like
Right.
chalkboard paint it and desecrate it,
Right. Right.
because you want to make sure it goes to a good home, right?
When we make the decision to let it go, we do have to understand that whatever they're gonna do with, they're gonna do with it, and you gotta kind of be okay with it. But you just hope you don't see it, you
Right.
know.
Yeah, you don't want to see
Or
pictures of it or something. Like,
right,
don't tell me you
right,
repainted it.
and now it's some cosmic freaking
Like I
like
see on, the
fluorescent
Facebook
color.
Marketplace, all of these antique dressers that have been painted all these wild colors.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's sacrilege to do to a beautiful oak dresser. Don't do that.
But again, those are places to look. Those are places
Did you
you can take your
struggle to
things.
get rid of anything? Was there anything that like really put a hitch in your get along that you either didn't get rid of or it took you a while to get rid of or you have buyer's remorse about, like you got rid of and then you wish you hadn't?
No,
No.
and it's weird. And again, only because my thought process was I had such a great time with her during that
Mm.
time. I didn't want to put myself into a situation where I was just constantly feeling the reminiscing over, oh man, we used to do that with this and this with this. I I just wasn't at that point. That's just the way I was feeling in that
Do you
respect.
think that that's typically a male perspective? Like, do you think the widowers have an easier time compartmentalizing that or not assigning emotional significance to tangible items? Because I feel like a lot of the widows I talk to and work with, it's the stuff like, their late husband's car, truck, whatever, boat, or his work boots. I still have the last pair of sneakers that Craig wore. Like he was in the rehab hospital and I had to bring him sneakers for rehab. And the he the sneakers he was wearing, when he first coded. I have those. They're under my bed here at the condo. Not even in the storage unit. Why they're here under my bed, I don't know, but it feels icky to put them in
It
storage
feels,
unit, which
and
I don't get. I don't get. Can't have his dresser with socks and underwear here at the condo. That feels icky, but that can be at the storage unit. But the sneakers he had that were stinky and are in a plastic bag, they're under the head of my bed. I don't know. I digress. But do you think that men have an easier time letting go of physical stuff because they're less likely to assign an emotional value to it?
I don't think it's a man thing. I think it's an individual thing when it
Okay.
comes to males, because some guys they want to keep everything that was of their marriage. Some guys are just like, man, I can't wait to get rid of it and start over. Not that they, not that they dislike the wife or anything. I think their thought process was that was a time in my life. And I don't want to keep bringing up that time in my life
Mm.
because that's the way I felt. I mean, I was like, look, I had spent 26 years with Kim, and
That's a
it
long
was
time.
like my whole thing was I have to understand that she is not coming back, and I can reminisce over these things. I can do that, but there is a reality here, and the reality is I can sit here and have all this flush of feelings come back and be in a interesting state at
Mm.
that point.
So it's almost like the
Well,
tangible stuff is more triggering
yes,
than not having it. And I think for women, it's more nostalgic than triggering. But I do think that there's a fine line, you know, as we move through this grief process and our journey into widowhood, it's very easy to get stuck and spin our wheels in our grief. And sometimes hanging on to stuff unnecessarily keeps us in a spot of stagnation. Like it keeps us in the same spot. So I'm not saying get rid of stuff just for the sake of getting rid of stuff, but being open to the opportunity as the universe presents it to you, you know, to downsize or shift or evolve, because that will help you continue to move through your grief. And especially
sure.
for a widower, like I can't even imagine what it's like to try to get rid of women's stuff. Like I look at my stuff and I'm like, man, I would not want to be responsible for trying to figure out what to do with the pantyhose and the purses and the tampons and all the things. Like as a man, like that's completely out of your consciousness of,
But
you know,
see,
like lady
those
stuff is complicated in general. So how do
those
you know
things
what
I
to
had to
do
get.
with all that?
You know what? Real simple. My daughters were clear. They were like, "Look, Daddy, those things you gotta get rid of. You gotta just throw away. Mommy's underwear, mommy's, you know, old tampons, this, and that. Look, you know, you could obviously wash it, clean it, do whatever, and give it to a church or whatever or a homeless shelter. But the other side of that too is like some of these places they won't accept it because of
Yeah, there's a hygiene thing there.
there's
Even
a
if it's
hygiene
clean,
thing.
it's something like I wouldn't want to wear someone else's used underwear,
Right,
clean or not. And
right,
that's nothing against anybody, but I'd rather go without than wear somebody else's old.
exactly. So my whole thing is certain things I knew I had to get rid of. You know, for me, her socks weren't gonna get rid of them because she did this funny sock thing for her kids, and
Because she was
I
what, a kindergarten teacher, right? So she used to
she was a
wear like
kindergarten
silly
teacher,
socks.
so she used to wear funny socks all the time, and I ended up finding ties and match those socks,
I
you
love
know.
that. Such a great
So
way to like pay homage to that part of her personality and integrate it into your life as you move forward.
it's that's definitely. I mean, look, we we can definitely have the conversation of being able to find ways to honor. That's something that we want to. I definitely want to be able to touch on, But looking at where we are right now with the items, some things we're going to keep, some things we're going to let go. We need to have a. It sucks. So we need to have a sense of sensibility about some things.
Mm.
We can't, we look. There are certain things that we know. Unfortunately, we do need to let go, even though we don't want to.
And some people have the
We have,
luxury or the opportunity, I guess I should say, to not have to downsize. Like some people can stay in the marital home or they choose to, you know, sustain that state of living. And so they don't have to downsize. They get to do it on their own time. But there's a health in it, right? Like in that transition, in the getting rid of their clothes, emptying the closet, or you know, buying a new bedspread. Like we had a split top king. And one of the first things I did after he died, which was really hard, was buying a new mattress that wasn't a split top anymore
uh,
because I got sick of rolling over to the middle of the bed and falling in the gap.
and falling at,
Yeah. So like
yep.
getting rid of the split top, like I kept the base and it's still a king size. And that's, I'll tell you what, sleeping in a king size bed by myself, is a whole other level of luxury I did not know I needed because he was a big dude, like linebacker. And so it didn't feel like a king size bed when we shared it. But now by myself, I'm like, woo, I can starfish all night long. It's delightful. So, but you know what I mean though, right? Like you spread out all your arms
Yeah,
and legs. Yeah, you starfish.
yeah.
Um,
I know what you're talking about.
but one of the things I did that was that transition piece that helped me get a better night's sleep, but was hard to like get rid of the mattress, that he was sleeping on. There, and then all the sheet sets because they were all split top sheet sets. So I had to get all new sheets and stuff too. Emptying out the closet. Like I saved his really nice winter jacket because I'm not sure if my son will fit into it later on. And I saved like one of his button-up shirts that had like French cuffs. And sometimes I'll wear it, like I'll dress it
Okay.
up as an oversized women's shirt and I'll belt it and wear it like a dress. And I have his cufflinks still, so like I'll do that. And I've got a couple of his ties, and his daughter's now husband actually wore the tie that he wore to our wedding, to her wedding. So like that was really cool.
Okay.
Um, but then there's other pieces that like you have to let go and you have to evolve. So even if you don't have that timeline crunch or that space crunch, you still have to be okay with eventually evolving and
Yeah.
moving forward. Um, what are some practical tips off the top of your head that you can think of for people who are making that transition? Like what to do with their wives' stuff?
The one thing I would say, well, not the one thing, basically set put yourself in a situation where you're going to set a day aside and you're going to organize. Organization is the key. Making sure that you know what it is that you want to keep. You know what it is you want to get rid of. And it's okay to have a pile that says, I'm not sure,
Mm,
you know,
as long
put
as
it
you
in that,
eventually go
I'm
through
not,
that pile.
yeah, you go through that pile because and then the next thing I say is create a list of places that you think could use the stuff.
Mm,
Like I said, for me, it was, look, my wife's school, different, different churches in the area.
mm-hmm.
You know, I did a Facebook Marketplace thing for like 3 items and go from there. And then I think I did some goodwill and just realize, but organize. See, or once you organize some type of plan, now you're reducing the amount of the anxiety.
Because it's not ambiguous.
Right. It's
It's
not.
not the unknown.
It's not that, oh man, this is something I should have kept, or oh man, it's something I should have got rid
Or
of.
where'd that end
And
up? Oh my God, did it accidentally
right.
get thrown out? Yep. Yeah,
And
no, I think that's great. And
there's
a quick Google search will tell you places in your area that, will take those types of donations. I know when I was
right,
going through it, it was the peak of COVID. So like a lot of places weren't accepting things.
right,
So I had to
right.
wait a little while, but I was actually able to call his old high school, his alma mater, and donate a fair amount of his like private library collection to the high school library. And then they stamped them in loving memory of, and I got to write his name in. So it's cool to think that like future high school generations where he went to school get to read some of his books. So that's really
Right.
cool. I dropped off a bunch of his clothes, like t-shirts and pajama pants and some socks at the local homeless shelter, the men's shelter that we have here in the area. So I dropped them off there. I definitely did some Goodwill, free on Marketplace, those kinds of things. The other thing I did was I made a quilt out of his graphic t-shirts. So I took some of them and there's a
Oh,
local
nice.
seamstress. Yeah, because I wanted something that like the kids could have and cherish and display, but not also like have all these random t-shirts around. And I certainly wasn't gonna wear them. And my son is too small for them currently. So I'm like they could take up space in a drawer, whatever, whatever. So I actually found a local seamstress. And there's people who do this all over the world, Etsy, whatever, whatever. Um, and I had a hard time trusting sending this stuff to like California in hopes that I would get the stuff back. So I
Right,
actually found a
right.
local person who was, just a couple towns over. And I met with her a couple times for coffee and we talked, and she was really patient and really gentle. But I gave her a select few of his t shirts and then she turned them into a small lap quilt that we have. And so she like cut the graphic off the t-shirt and then backed them in that like polar fleece. And so it's really nice. We could even frame it if we wanted to. So that was just a really cool way to repurpose. Finding, like I said,
And
I wear
that's,
one of those dress
yep.
shirts, and finding those things how to upcycle or recycle or find new life for, even if you do keep it, you don't have to use it the same way it was being used before. So be okay with getting creative with their stuff.
Oh, let me tell you something. Here's the one thing I did find. I was able to find that I could get a lot of my stuff back.
Oh,
You know,
really?
I mean, no, I'm talking about from my wife. Because
Yeah.
when she passed, I'm like, oh man, I've been looking for this.
Feeling all your
You
hoodies and your
know,
sweatpants and stuff.
yup, yup. But
Oh, see?
it's interesting because
But now those have
I
even more
have,
meaning, because not only do they fit
yes,
you and they're
that's what
yours,
I was going to
but you
say.
can still use them. And now there's a closeness and a connection and a nostalgia with that article or item.
There are a couple of sweatshirts. There's one sweatshirt that when we went to Martha's Vineyard, she used to wear that all the time. I mean, to the point where it was like almost interchangeable. So I was like, okay, I got that shirt now. You know what I'm saying? But
Love that.
that whole type of thing. Well, listen, I mean, honestly, the reality is where you decide to take the things, that's personal. That's up to you. It's you know, take a day. Like I said before, take a day.
Get some
Organize.
support too, like,
Yeah.
foster some support, whether you have a grief captain, as I like to call it, a designated person who can help you, or whoever's out there listening, you reach out to us. We both have websites. You can find that in the show notes, listed below. Reach out to one of us. We'd be happy to talk with you about what to do with your spouse's stuff. Talk to a friend, talk to a pastor, talk to one of their friends, one of their coworkers. There's
Mm,
lots of resources and avenues out there. Don't feel like you have to do this part alone, because it's a big undertaking and it's physically demanding
absolutely.
and emotionally demanding. And like we said before, give yourself permission to change your mind and take your time with it. So, but I could talk about this all day. We are unfortunately out of time for this episode this week.
And we really want to thank you for listening to the show today.
If you enjoyed this episode, just be sure to check out previous episodes. They can be found on your favorite streaming platform.
Make sure you like and subscribe to make sure that you get access to all of our content in the future.
With grief and gratitude, I'm Kate.
I'm Jay. And until next time.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.